Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Lakshmidhar sir. Yeah, we will start in a minute, sir.
Ramkumar, sir. Good evening. Sir, you are muted.
Sir, good evening, sir. Good evening. Good evening.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
After a long time. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we will start in a minute, sir.
No problem.
Yeah. Few more participants have to join.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah, I think people are joining fast. Maybe in a minute, we will get at least 70 participants.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Sridhar sir.
Yeah, yes, sir.
John Paul, sir, from Christ University. Welcome, sir. Yeah, I think it's time to start. Let me start it formally. Yeah, just an ethical concern. This webinar is recorded for our official purpose, and this is available in our social media website also. Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all in this fine evening. We are having the 6th webinar of FIREBIRD International Webinar Series. We have Mr. Dave Millner. He's a very renowned HR influencer, and he's rated as number 16th rank HR influencer by HR Magazine. So we are proud to have our resource person today. And along with our resource person, we have our management people, Honorable Managing Trustee Madam, and other managing trustees. And we have our Honorable Director, sir, Dr. Srinivasa Rao, and we have our Controller of Examination and other faculty members. Moreover, students are FIREBIRD's asset, and we have everybody. So I welcome everyone. Very importantly, the participants. We have got more than 800 registrations for this webinar. Out of which we are able to accommodate only 100. So we have sent only 300 invitations to 300 participants, and people are joining now. So other participants are able to watch this webinar through our social media, YouTube and Facebook link, and this is also communicated to them. So I welcome everyone wholeheartedly for this webinar. And we have Mr. Dave Millner. He's a renowned consultant, consulting partner, HR Curator from London. He's available with us. A formal note, I would like to introduce our resource person. Dave has a business background of working in financial services in the area of retail and corporate lending and risk for some 8 years, followed by 30 years of internal and external HR consulting experience in NatWest, RBS, PSL, Connexa, and IBM, so on, as an occupational psychologist. Dave worked directly with the different global and multinational based organizations offering organizational effectiveness based solutions focusing on future proofing their business. And he is a regular presenter at various global level HR conferences, promoting the role of technology, people analytics, the need for HR to be more commercial in its approach so that it can be demonstrate a tangible business value. His first book, Introduction to People Analytics on the Changing Role of HR and the Increasing Demand for Data Insiders, was published in 2020 and has been published in China in 2022. He is referenced as being a key influencer on Twitter via HR Curator in several HR subject areas, like there are more than 30,000 plus followers are there for him in Twitter. And he is an associate with the Corporate Research Forum, GPS Asia, Hult Astrich Business School, the Center for Effective Organizations at the University of Southern California, and is an advisor to iSciTech, a cultural analytic provider. And he's one of the engaged employees forward thinker for 2021 and 2022, and was recently HR Magazine's number 16th rank HR Most Influential Thinker award he has got for 2021 year. So we are proud to have resource person, Mr. Dave Millner here. Sir, this is open to you. Before that, I would like to talk about our institute. FIREBIRD Institute of Research and Management is located in Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. It's a state in India. And we are offering PGDM course, postgraduate diploma in management. And also we are offering research and consultancy services to the industry. And our institute is backed by one of the topmost corporate group in Tamil Nadu, which is Banariaman and Shiva Texian groups. And our MD, Dr. Sundar Raman, he has a different vision to convert this mainstream education into industry integrated curriculum. So he's taking a lot of effort to make it done, and all the faculty, director, everybody is supporting in line with that. And we are happy to note that our students is also able to, understand and convince that industry integrated curriculum is very important, and they are able to accustomed with our different culture and curriculum, and they are doing their best. So with this note, I request Mr. Dave Millner to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ramkumar, very, very kindly. Thank you for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to spend some time with you, particularly as it's in the evening for you guys, and I'm most impressed that you're prepared to even want to listen to me at this time. But my topic is, I'm going to talk, yes, about people analytics, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about HR, because my view about people analytics is that we really need to try and ensure that HR becomes more data-driven in the way that it operates, the way that it thinks. And that's, I guess, the whole sort of rationale as to the approach that I'm going to take you through. The slides will be available for sharing. So, please don't worry about taking notes and things. The slides will be available. The agenda is going to be a very brief introduction around the challenges facing HR as I see it, talk a little bit about why HR needs to be more data-driven, talk to you about the people analytics journey that I've been through and that I've researched and that I've seen over the last 13, 14 years that I've been involved in this. And then I'm just going to share a little bit of research that I'm in the throes of doing. You're the first people to hear about it. It's where I've been running a lot of workshops with HR business partners and just trying to get them to be more data driven. And I think there are some barriers and some challenges that need to be overcome before we can even go that far. And then I'll talk a little bit about what needs to change, with possibly just a view about the HR of the future as I see it. So hopefully that will be of help to you. I've tried to change some of the contents around some of the questions that have already been asked. As I say, I've tried to manipulate it a little bit. So let me just go back. As Ramkumar very kindly summarized, I've worked in and around HR for about 30 years. probably a bit longer than that now. And HR is most definitely on its journey. And I think one of the really interesting things that I'm seeing is that we're focusing on trying to be, an integrated talent management provider, and that's fantastic. And we're using technology, etc. My view is that we need to drive HR to be more impact driven. It needs to be focusing on the commercial aspects. We need to embrace the technology. We need to focus on the experience of the employees in our workforce. The pandemic has shaken every country across the globe, and I think every organization has to think a little bit differently now about the way in which it thinks and the way in which it treats its employees. My view about HR is that we have got to be more future orientated. We've got to be focused on profit and growth and spend less time worrying about costs, because I think we've probably reduced those as much as we can. My perspective is that data and analytics is a really key enabler of making that change. So if I look briefly at tomorrow's world, I just want to I guess what I see is that there are disruptors externally. From a political point of view, obviously, as we're experiencing at the moment, but there's fierce competition, and obviously the post-pandemic or getting to the near or a different stage of the pandemic, people are thinking differently about their lives and their jobs. From an organizational point of view, there are challenges globally about new work patterns and whether we need to revert back to how we've always used to work. The digital desire continues, and there is a need for growth and profitability to deal with some of the difficult 2021 that the organizations went through. I talk about the now of work. I don't talk about the future of work. I talk about the now of work, because I think the last 2 years has kick-started a lot of these changes. So from an organizational point of view, we've been looking at the employee experience. There's that word again. We're looking at constant change, and we're looking at new operating models to try and embrace what the workforce and the organization needs. From a workforce capability, we've definitely got to try and adjust and ensure that we've got the right capability in place. I think we've got to deal with constant learning for everybody now. And we've got to try and deal with, the best word I can think of is some employees feel a bit overwhelmed from everything that's now expected from them. I think one of the critical things from an HR perspective is about priorities. And I think HR across the globe has got to be much better at prioritizing what it needs to do. And I think that if we can do that, that will enable both more tangible value being demonstrated. We're going to need data and analytics to help us to do that. And I think we need to really reinforce the people focus, the experience, the personalization, and remembering that, we're called HR for a very good reason. And we must never forget the human, the H in HR. It's incredibly important. My final point here is of what I call the 3 Ds. And these are, I guess, my summation of what I believe is the challenges for the HR function, both today and certainly over the next 12 to 18 months. I think our challenges revolve around data, the need to have a data-driven culture, the need to design and think in a more future-orientated way. HR has striven to become more strategic for years. I'm not sure we were ever really positioned to be able to do that. And I think the best way we can demonstrate it is by really having the courage to focus on the future demands and try and align what we do within our function to those demands. And obviously the digital world will continue at a great pace. And I think we need to really embrace it and use it to enable us to really focus on the prioritization, there's that word again, of the key things that are so very important to us. They're all interlinked. And I guess that's why the data piece, the people analytics piece, for me is so important, because for once, we now have a way of demonstrating the value and that we can bring to every organization. And I think it's a conversation that every function has had a challenge in trying to show. In a number of the questions that were asked by prior to the session was about capability. Where does analytics face? Why is it so important? I think if you look at Dave Ulrich's research, which he did in April last year, he identified 5 key aspects of his model as it evolved from his research in terms of the things that he believes are really important. Not just around business focus, around collaboration, around thinking about the person and simplifying things, but mobilizing information is about data and analytics. In the book that Ramkumar mentioned at the beginning that I wrote with Nadine Khan, my colleague, we found these were the 6 types of roles, together with the people advocate role, which we think were becoming very important. I don't expect HR to be good at all of these things, but I think what it's trying to get across is that there is a cultural focus, there is a business and productivity focus, and with the technology and our talent capability, this role of the data and analytics translator is very important. In simple terms, it's saying, I do not want HR practitioners to be data geeks. I do not want you to be a data scientist. But what I do need is for all of us within the function to be more data driven in terms of the way we think, the way we approach issues, and the way in which we interact with the internal business leaders and clients. It's a challenge. There is some research here from analytics in HR, and this was self-assessment by thousands of HR professionals across the globe, and they were all saying that the challenges from a capability point of view revolve around data literacy, business or commercial acumen, and becoming more proficient in the data world. And both sets of those data are highlighting that these are important. So I think it's really critical that we focus on that, because we cannot just rely on being the policeman or the policy maker within the HR function. We need to be far more fleet of foot. We need to be far more agile in the way that we focus. And I think the key is that we have really got to become far more aligned to the strategy of the organization and focus on the modern future issues that are going to become imminent. Now, there are lots of organizations that are already using data. These are just some very simple examples. So in the recruiting and onboarding space, there are chatbots which are taking candidates through technologically the candidate process. There's automated assessments and testing. There is even in some organizations automated interviews that are being undertaken. Organizations are trying to use that recruitment data and try to make sure that it is utilized both in the onboarding process, but also in the performance management process and in the learning and development that the individual needs. And the whole beauty about having technology is not about making this an impersonal HR function. It's about enabling us to provide solutions that meet the employee's needs, and more importantly, gives us the quality of time to be able to really focus on those future-orientated activities which add the greatest value. From performance dialogue and training, we've got automated coaching, we've got personalized learning that will look at your past searches and will be able to start to provide you with ideas and tips as you go along. So technology can be scary, but from my perspective, I think it really adds great value. And particularly if we look at this future and looking at the effectiveness of organizations, this is about using data to help us with our planning, about understanding engagement and productivity challenges, trying to link data from people to business data, and trying to make sure that the dashboards, technology, systems are really being used to their greatest effect. There is no point having all of this if we're not able to utilize it and use it to help both our clients, but also more importantly, to help the employees as they move forward on their own personal journey. Technology, it is constant. The speed of it is amazing. Here is a technological response from an organization to the employee experience. So every single one of those bullet points that you can see is an app. It's an app. The organization has its own Apple Store. It has its own App Store, and it is able to therefore, over a 4 or 5 year period, have created all of those apps which talk to their technology platform, which enables users to have access to them dependent on their role and their requirements. The critical thing is that this isn't just about providing it to make it sexy. It's about making sure that collectively this is going to support and enable the workforce to develop their capability and, more importantly, to perform. So a little bit of context there on why I believe the change needs to happen. So why do I think people analytics is a critical part of that? This is my definition of people analytics. I use the phrase people analytics because obviously there are different types of phrases that are being used. But people analytics for me is the use of data and analytic tools to identify insights on people that enable faster, more accurate and more confident business decision making. So critical thing here is it's about data, about providing insights that enable better quality business decisions. Now, HR is very good at sometimes making things complicated, and you will no doubt have heard that sometimes people call this HR analytics, some people call it people analytics, some people call it workforce analytics. This is a blog from Cruncher, who are an HR tech provider. This is how they clarified the 3 different ways of how it can be described. I will use the phrase people analytics throughout the session, but I think it's useful just to understand that there is an interchangeability of language that's being used. My view is that HR analytics is predominantly around the functioning of the HR function. So that could be looking at KPIs, metrics, and some simple analysis. People analytics is about bringing HR and business data together. And workforce analytics is probably about HR, business data, and also the automated data that AI and machine learning can bring. And I will share some examples as we go along, just to sort of bring some of these things to life. This for me is the journey, and this does not mean this is the only way in which you can become a people analytics organization. But the research that Nadim and myself did and have continued to do has reinforced that these are sorts of the activities that are undertaken. Point number 1 is the criticality of the fact that the key to people analytics is what I call a commercial mindset. It underpins every activity. By that, I mean, in HR as a practitioner, we need to have a clear understanding about the financials of your organization. We need to have a view about externally what is going on in the outside world, what your competitors are doing, how are they recruiting, how are they developing people. We need to know the internal organizational view about the strategy, about the interdependencies between different functions. And finally, we also need to be what I call organizationally savvy. We need to know how to get things done in an organization. And more importantly, and I think this is really important, is that as a practitioner, you need to have a view about every business issue, not just an HR issue. Because if we desire to want to have a seat at a table, there is no point sitting at a table if you have nothing to say. So we have to make sure that we have a clear understanding and have a view about marketing, about procurement, about operations. Everybody's very keen to have a view about HR and people, so there's no reason why we shouldn't also be of the same. Let me briefly describe these 4 levels. Level 1 is about fairly random activity, probably with some metrics, probably where data is quite untidy in different places, quite difficult to do, probably quite a lot of reference to what I call perception-based data. So that would be survey data. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's insightful and useful, but obviously it's a view of people. And there could be other elements that we need to embrace. At level 2, we're starting to think about getting an integrated HR information system. The reason why I use the word integrated is that in a number of organizations, guess what? We have 1, 2, or 3. In some organizations, I've seen 5, 6, or 7 different HR technology systems. So we've got to somehow bring these together so that we can create common dashboards, common business intelligence and data, and have clarity about what it is that the people data is telling us. It enables us to focus on maybe some, one-off metrics which are required for your organizations, or it certainly enables us to have what I call an ROI focus, where we will start to look at the value and the benefit of initiatives, looking at the cost incurred, and more importantly, turning our practices, our talent practices, into some way of measuring them in a financial way. The big jump that organizations try to make is moving from level 2 to 3. And the key that I really want to reinforce is that level 1 and level 2 may not appear to be very sexy, may not appear to be very important, but they provide the foundations for analytics-based activity. Because at level 3, we will be using statistical analysis. We will also be using mathematical analysis, which some HR practitioners will be more than comfortable to do. But what we're really looking at is looking at factors to help us to understand cause, correlation, implications. And inevitably, if organizations are operating in that way, they will probably be wanting to think about how can we develop our HR function to be more data-driven. The final one at level 4 is where we really have probably statistical experts. We may have an analytics team. They will be looking at predictive and prescriptive type models, which are future-based using past data. We'll probably be looking at risk, planning. The whole thing is trying to operate, and you will find the whole HR function is operating in a very data-orientated way. And ideally, and I will share one final example near the end, that HR will aim to be a profit center or a value add center. We have spent too long thinking of ourselves as a cost center, and we need to really be focusing around the more proactive, how can we impact future growth, future sales, future revenue. Costs we can impact, but there are only so many costs that we can change. So that's the frame that the research that I've done has sort of shown. The journey, as I said, commercial mindset, which I've talked about. The data and metrics, quality data is very important, and I'll just talk about that in just a moment. The need to develop analytics capability. And as I said, this is about, for practitioners, mathematics driving insights, being numerically savvy, but also knowing when to seek expertise from analytics-based experts. And that's really important, because my concern is that analytics experts have scared HR people, because HR did not probably join to become data and technology experts. But what I'm saying is, I don't want you to be an expert, but I need you to be very savvy and much more aware of what they can provide you. And obviously, governance is very important in terms of ethics, privacy, security, and making sure that the data is not inherently biased. So there is a lot to this. And this whole subject is not something that you can change overnight. It is a journey. I explained what I think the people analytics journey is. There are other routes to that journey, but it has a whole load of different complexities. I wanted just to very briefly, I'm not going to dwell on it, but I think it's really important that every organization, irrespective of their size, needs to think about where can we find our data, what data do we have, what data do we not have. As you can see, there are 4 elements to this. First one, core employee data. I get so many people who say to me, we haven't got quality data, we haven't got a technology system, so we can't do this. Wrong. You have 2 pieces of data which every organization has, which will enable you to start to do some things in this space, namely time and money. You know the salary of employees and you know the time that they spend. Time and money provide you what I call this time is money equation. It's the very simplest way of analytically starting to understand and think about what you can do. As you can see in the UK, by the time we've thought about taxes, bonuses, training costs, mobiles, laptops, if there was somebody on £50,000 UK salary, that means the organization is probably spending £70,000 a year to employ them. And so that works out at that sort of cost, just over £300 a day. So that's one piece of cost. That's a piece of data that you can use across the globe. You'll see that there is people data. You'll see, and you can see some examples of where that may be. And you might even want to look and use this and start to say, well, we've got this data, but we haven't got that data. How can we go about creating it? Business data is endless, and those are just some examples. And external data has undoubtedly value in the journey, particularly when it comes to published research, sector-specific research, etc. So never forget that it has value. So I've talked a bit about the journey. I've talked a little bit about the data. I guess what I wanted to do was just take you through some stories, and I'm not going to go into great detail. The slides provide you with all the content, and so you can read that in your own time. But this level 1, time is money. I literally was speaking to an old sales colleague of mine, very pleased. He's moved into a new organization in America. He's got 15 salespeople and he's managed to get a training course for $30,000. And I said to him, yeah, that's great. I said, but actually it's costing you a lot more money than $30,000. And he said to me, no, it's not. And I said, let me show you. So I looked at their salary. I looked at how many days a year they work. I looked at the cost per day of these people, and it came to that amount of money. I then said, well, whilst you're training and having a great time and all this sort of stuff, they're not selling. So there's the sales target as it was in 2020. This is the average target that they were on, and therefore they should be on average selling that amount of money per day, which means it's 102,000. So in actual fact, by the time you accumulated these figures and put on top the cost of the training, the cost is nearer $140,000, not 30. That's very simple analysis, metric, a basis for a return on investment. So just trying to show you that you can do this. You do not need to be a statistician to do that. This is a simple example of metrics. This organization, supply chain organization, were losing in 2020 25% of their supervisors and managers, and that meant they lost 220 out of 875 managers. HR had ideas about what they wanted to do, but they then needed to persuade the executive. So what they did is they worked on this time is money approach, and they worked out that for every vacancy, the average salary was £45,000 per year, was going to cost them £70,000 per year in lost productivity, lost income, lost replacement costs, and training. That was 15.4 million, which was 29% of the previous year's profits. So what I've done is I've suddenly turned a number into a business focus for them by relating back to their profitability, back to their results. So the leaders immediately said, we need to do something about this because this is serious. And as a result, in 2021, the turnover had fallen. They were still losing managers, but they've also saved during this period about £3 million in training costs and recruitment costs during 2021. So HR has suddenly become something where they've been using business speak to turn their approaches into something that's more useful. This is something I work with in the UAE. It's a bank. There was an issue on performance, and the CEO said, well, can I look at the engagement results and see if there's anything to help me, because I've got inconsistent unit performance, but I do know I've got some good people. So we found that there were 5 high-performing units out of 19 in this region. L&D developed a 2-day mentoring program for those 5 managers, and they mentored the other 14 managers. So this was very simple. On a spreadsheet, we basically looked at their sales figures on day 1, and we looked at their sales figures at day 180, 6 months on, and we found the following changes had happened. Sales results had improved by 8.9%. So we're talking millions of dirhams here. Customer satisfaction had increased by 4.8%. And in the subsequent year, 4 of the 5 mentor managers became area managers who, because of the fact they demonstrated that they were able to focus on performance, change, and development. The initiative was subsequently used across the rest of the Middle East region. A very simple technique, a very simple way. We don't always need complex analysis. My next example is at level 2. It's a little bit more complex. It's basically a company that was recruiting 600 people a year across the globe. They built a centralized resourcing function in Dubai, the US, and the UK. They focused on a completely new way of recruiting, very KPI or performance indicator driven. They had maps for each role, each job family, and they were very, very persistent about measurement. These are some of the things, some of the benefits that the program over a 12-month period highlighted. Not just changes and improvements in time, but reduce expenditure of nearly $500,000. So immediately when HR are talking in this language, the executive are listening, because they are now starting to understand that actually HR can talk the language of the business. The next one is a simple example about dashboards. You know, for those of you who have seen dashboards within an HR information system, dashboards are great, but we need to have structure. And this is there is a challenge which, you know, is a global phenomenon of starting to look at right sizing, restructuring, downsizing. So I got involved in helping with this company to create this new structured dashboard that was creating some specific criteria that was relevant if we were going to assess the risk of losing somebody if they had decided to make them unemployed. What basically this has now enabled a number of organizations to start to, from the examples they've shared with us, save about £75,000 per campaign in terms of time. They found engagement levels have stabilized or improved because there are now much more thought is going into the decision-making process. And there are also, and I've received other sales information in the last couple of days, which has highlighted that customer service and sales figures have actually increased as a result of not releasing people and not making that knee-jerk reaction of we must reduce costs. So the key, I guess I'm saying, is structure and use of criteria is vital, particularly when you're at these lower levels. I'm moving now into level 3. And so what I'm trying to share with you is some more complex examples. This one is, yes, more complex, but actually mathematically very simple to do and was completed by HR business partners. So this is where there was an issue with customer service And the key issue was that managers were the problem. There was an assessment of needs, and much to the business's disagreement, I said we must assess the people so that we can gauge where they are starting from before we put them through the learning program. You would think that that would be common sense, but it doesn't always happen. Again, a simple analysis was undertaken. We had improvements in capability, team engagement improved. The most important thing was productivity, time savings of nearly £500,000, and upselling had improved by nearly £275,000. And what was so interesting is that the execs said, please don't bother with ROI. We want you to talk to us in our language. So please talk the language of engagement, productivity, customer, targets, sales, etc. And so therefore the whole of the learning function has now had to change to think in a more data and more business orientated way. I wanted to just share an example that I got involved with. This is an AI machine learning technology piece. There was a government agency in Dubai that could not improve productivity without increasing its headcount. And so what they wanted to do was to look at, is there a better way of doing this? What happened is that this company, Enable, went in, they analyzed 480 million rows of data from 12 different systems and identified, using this method of observe, predict, and recommend, they were able to find some of these very significant changes. They found that only 1.1% of the process work led to its intended result. That's quite horrific. There was a variance of 261% between the high performers and the poor performers. They were able to save thousands and thousands of hours, which equated to about 1.4 million euros in savings. They were able to increase capacity because they've changed process, they've simplified, they've done a whole host of things. They've saved nearly 6 million euros in terms of capacity and capability because of the changes that have been made. And the most important thing is that in the subsequent year of this being implemented, productivity was improved by 11.5% with the same amount of people. My next example is a leadership example. Somebody had asked some questions about the use of data in identifying better leaders. This is what GSK did. They looked to see how can we try and improve our managers and leaders who are struggling by using our leaders who are really good as role models. So what we did is that based on engagement data, we're able to find that they had 453 really good, high-performing leaders, 380 leaders who were struggling. There was all sorts of differences in results of engagement levels, which were in that sort of range, so quite significant. We also had 360-degree data, which identified not just capability gaps, but also identified that the most effective leaders were really exceptional in these three areas. A program was developed from learning and development. All of the leaders were offered the opportunity to go through it. 301 leaders did. They then had the subsequent results of engagement improving, productivity of their teams improving. There's a business number again. Retention, the teams improved. There again is another business number. And what was really important is that the coaching element of the program was able to be seen as the most impactful. So analytics can embrace any part of the employee life cycle by drawing on core data about capability and drawing on data from other processes. I'm talking now about level 4, and I just wanted to share one of my an example I worked on in the very early days at IBM. We had something called regrettable attrition, i.e. we were losing people we did not want to lose. So these were the key questions that we were trying to answer. And we collected data from these various sources. So you can see a lot of different sources, a lot of different variables and factors. So we're getting into a lot of statistical analysis here. This is a stats experts who are doing this. An algorithm was created based on that research, and then we tested it against employees, both historically who had left us and also some current ones. And we identified key factors and trends which said, we believe that if we do something now, i.e. 6 to 9 months ahead of time, we believe that we will enable this person to stay with us. There was training done for leaders and managers so that they understood their role. And as a result of implementing this, attrition was reduced over an 18-month period by 25%. The business identified $300 million worth of savings over a 4-year period by recruiting, training, and opportunity costs. This is now business as usual within the HR function of IBM. It's just a core activity which they now do. I wanted to share a workforce planning example. This is a Nordic company that had a new product launched, changing completely the way in which it was going to deliver. And so again, these were some key questions around what we were trying to address. We built a capability database that identified both behavioral and technical skills. We identified what the new skills would be, and we developed 3 different scenarios. The 3 scenarios were: most people can learn the skills, some recruiting will be needed with people switching, or mostly new recruits with the release of existing employees. And using that data and looking historically at what had happened and what could happen, we were able to identify that scenario 1 was seen as the one that would be the most effective. It saved them 1.2 million euros in recruitment costs and probably about €1 million in redundancy costs. So the role of strategic workforce planning is one of these critical strategic processes that HR has really got to embrace, and the use of data will enable us to draw on people analytics for the better. My final case study is my profit one. I mentioned that HR can become a profit center, and this is how Experian did it. Experian, for those of you who don't know, are consumer credit reporting. So they basically will look at individuals and see how reliable are they for us to lend money to this person. They had an attrition problem, and it was costing the business about $3 million a year. Now, HR was operating at level 1 on their journey. What they did is they recruited a people analytics expert. Okay, so they've gone straight to level 4, but they've done it with a project that said, we need to find out, why are we losing people? They identified 20 key factors. They then were able to assess all of their employees and gauge, how can we start to focus on retention strategies for all of these people? Because in Experian, this is an organization of data scientists, okay? They are very costly to recruit, very costly to train, and if you lose them, only somebody else is going to benefit from them. As a result of their approaches, their attrition has reduced by 4%, saving nearly $14 million over 2 years. HR has completely revolutionized itself in that 2-year period and is now operating at level 4. It does predictive modeling for everything: training, pay decisions, retention of female talent, everything. Everything, the whole function is data driven. It eats and breathes data. And the profit center piece, as a result of their research, their retention tool has obviously evolved and become very fine-tuned. But what they have now done is that they now sell their retention tool externally to other organizations and to other HR functions to help them on their people analytics journey. So they are now generating income for the business. So I've given you a host of examples there, and I'm sorry that's quite quick, but I'm hoping that that will give you a flavor about what you can do. But I guess the learnings for me are people analytics is not about making every practitioner a data analyst. It's about making HR more commercial and data driven. I think there are 4 takeaways for me, having been involved in practically all of those case studies. Data, we need to get core data, and basic mathematics can help. It can provide insights. So don't just think that it has to go to some expert. We've got to talk the language of the business. We've got to solve business problems, not people problems. By that, I mean, if somebody says to you, my team is, they're not operating very effectively, we immediately think it's a behavioral problem, let's put them on a team building. What I'm saying is we need to get the customer to start to say, well, what is the real problem? What is the impact of that situation having on your performance? And it could be actually a productivity issue. It could be a sales issue. It could be a whole host of things. But we've got to try and elevate it to a business scenario, because if we can, the organization and the leader will be far more interested in that than just making the team work better together. We need to have focus. Prioritization of issues is really important. We mustn't overpromise, and we've got to try and retain simplicity. All of those examples I shared you are on one slide. Okay, when I've presented on a number of those, the full scenario back to the client, it's 5 or 6 slides. I am not providing them 30 slides of telling them every piece of analysis, because leaders love to critique a data and love to focus on that. And the final thing, teamwork. Some of this is around HR business partners working with people as analytics specialists. Some of them are about working with collaborators, the clients, working externally with vendors. Collaboration is important. And I think you've also got to know when experts are required. That's quite important. Business partners have a critical part to play in this. And I just want to, and I'll go through this very quickly, but it just shows that we've got a lot of work to do. I've run over the last 15 months, probably about 50 workshops and webinars, focusing on how HR practitioners, probably about 1,250 people, must become more data-driven in their approach. And so I used to do a sort of initial icebreaker. Where do HR business partners spend their time and why? And over the time, I've now collected 901 pieces of data. I've got another pack that has in my emails to look at. But I thought I'd just give you some flavor. Firstly, the average reporting week is 50 hours. So this is working in HR is a tough gig. This is the spread of where the people are from. So you can see 20% of them came from India, Malaysia, 4% Australasia, 19% Europe, 15% UK, etc. You will find that this was the breakdown of the sectors. So various sectors, from charities and public sector through to manufacturing and banks. Also, this is how long those individuals had been in the HR function. So interestingly enough, the majority of the people who seem to be focusing on improving data and analytics are probably those, over half of them are where they have been in the function for some time. So that for me is good. I also got them to self-report, so I have to rely on what they've told me. And 128 of them said they were exceptional high performers. 123 were saying, I'm struggling, I've got things I'm trying to improve. This is why I'm going on this training course. So there's a spread there. This is what the data said. The data said that basically business partners are spending 38% of their time as a solution provider, solving operational puzzles. This amount of time on strategic activity, and as you can see, the rest of them, but more importantly, 10% of their time on reporting, data, and analytics. So that's a very small part of time that's being used. I then wanted to look at, is there any difference between what those exceptional business partners and the developing business partners are? And what we found is that exceptional business partners spend less time solving these operational puzzles. They spend only 30% of their time. We found that the exceptionals spend more time focusing on these strategic, future-based challenges and planning challenges, not 10%, but 26% from an exceptional, and the group was at 18. We found that the business partners spend less time focusing on the efficiency of local practices. Instead of 20%, 18 for the group, only 12. And what we found is that they spend nearly double the amount of time of the original group, but certainly well over double the time of the less performers on reporting, data and analytics activities. And that involves storytelling and a whole host of different things. The point I'm trying to get across here is that people analytics requires a collaborative approach. People analytics teams need to help business partners and HR practitioners understand their database capability and help them to become better at using and appreciating what data can do for you. I think, what needs to change, we need to focus on capability in the future. We need to focus on learning and understanding what we need to do. We've got to embrace data and technology because that's going to enable us to start to focus and prioritize on those things that are the most critical. And I think what I would be saying to you is that if I look at functions across the globe, I think a lot of HR functions operate like a service station. That could be called a gas station in the States, a petrol station. In other words, you go in and you fill up with fuel when you need it, and then you disappear and you go back again when you require it again. Now, that's great. We're very client focused, but we're operationally reactive. And I think we focus on efficiency and cost. And my view is that we have the ability to shift to what I call as a power station. A power station does not get you appreciated any more than you currently are. But what it does do is it focuses on transformation, capability, and technology. And the critical thing is that it really is underpinned by evidence, data, future-proofing, and technology. And underpinning it is this commerciality. There's that theme again. So those are the changes that I believe. And, if we don't do anything, it could be that HR doesn't exist by 2030, because you could say, why don't we just merge finance, marketing, and HR together under the banner of a performance function? There's commonalities of data, design, and digital, domain expertise. They have strategic and operational activity. It would lead to better alignment, specific expertise, and access to data without having to cross boundaries. My preference is that I think HR could be more strategic. And I hope some of you had the opportunity to listen to my very good friend, Max Bloomberg, about April last year, when he talked about his vision for the future of the operating model of HR. And this HR data that I've just shared with you is really, for me, crystallized the fact that is the HR business partner the role that we really need to rely on in the future? Because we need to be answering these questions. What strategic and tactical capabilities do we need to meet the strategy? What talent processes do we need to put in place to give you the capabilities that you need? What evidence and data do we have to help us with that, and also to build the technology requirements? And how do we transform the capability of leaders and managers to make those changes? The deeper OAM, as Ramkumar has articulated. Thank you, Ramkumar. So for me, all of this is around how do we facilitate workforce-based strategies, interventions, and properties. And if we change the HR function to look like that, with these 5 functions, that then starts to enable us to then say, the business partner role is no more. The capability of leaders is dealt with by that team. The strategizing that we struggle with is dealt with by that team. We still draw on our talent domain expertise. And here are some of the roles that I believe from some organizations that are playing with this, considering it. These are some of the roles that are emerging to do that. What needs to change in the meantime? Individually, everybody can always change. This is a piece of work that was done by a company called peopleinsight.com. If you look at the link at the bottom, please make a note of it, and you can download what they have is a playbook, and it focuses on these 4 areas in terms of the commerciality focus that I've talked about the consulting and the commercial perspective, about the requirements of strategy, technology, and systems, and then the change. So if you're very interested in learning more about analytics, please do download it. It's free. It's included in the book, but as I say, download it from there and you get it as a standalone from People Insight, which is a Canadian-based analytics company. I think final points, because I need to leave time for questions. This is where people analytics is being used and where the perception is that it can add the greatest value at these sorts of areas. These are the sorts of areas where the majority of activity in analytics is being focused at the moment. So I believe that the shift for those organizations that are already on this journey will be towards these sorts of areas, probably during 2022 and 2023. These are where they are far more future orientated, far more strategically aligned. So regrettably, for those of you who may not like people analytics or the need for data, it isn't going to go away. And I guess disruption is just going to be a part of every HR function. I guess what I would say is, please let's not go down the Ulrich, here is the Ulrich model and we all copy it. One size does not fit all. We've got to become far more aligned to strategic outcomes. And I think we need to make sure that we outlaw administrative and low-level operation activity. I think we've got to value what HR does. Everybody treats HR very badly, and we've got to stand up for ourselves. We cost money. The back to time is money. So we need to be promoting that. We need to be on a constant learning journey. I regularly advocate to people on my workshops, you need to book half an hour every week to just have a self-development session that says, what am I going to learn this week? What have I learned last week? And really drive a learning program, because it will not happen overnight. Careers in HR, it's an exciting time. There is a huge opportunity for HR to really grasp the ability to demonstrate what we can do. Remember, it's about being data driven. It's not about being a data scientist. The key is that we've got to show our credibility, and that means we've got to demonstrate value. So I'm going to go quiet now, Ramkumar, if that's all right with you. Please, those are my details. Very happy if you'd like to follow me on Twitter. As Ramkumar said, there are about nearly 31,000 now following me, I think, or follow me on LinkedIn, or just go to my website and you can see on the library link there, there's a whole host of articles about HR transformation, etc. And if the book is of interest to you, then those are the details, and there's even a discount code to save you some money. So I'm going to shut up and go back to Ramkumar.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation, and we enjoyed a lot of examples from the relevant industry. And I think participants also enjoyed a lot, and they have learned many things. So this is time for question and answer. Sir, there is a participant, Ashyastri. He is asking, how do modern day HR policies cope up with the need for ambidextrous organizations?
I think great question. I think the issue of the policies is that we've got to be focusing on what are the needs for tomorrow. What are the challenges for tomorrow? And we've got to be anticipating what they are. So I think we spend too much time being reactive. And I think what I've seen in a number of organizations is that they are going through their policies, particularly in a number of regions across the globe where hybrid working is becoming, a very active topic. So what they're actually starting to look at all of their policies and start to hybrid them, if for want of a better word, to basically anticipate and then approach the business and start to say, this is what we need to do, this is why we need to do it, this is how we need to do it. Do you agree? So I think we have the ability to do that. I think we've got to be on the front foot, and I think it's a critical part of what we do. But I think somehow we've got to get ourselves not disconnected, but we've got to find a better way of trying to make sure that the policies remain up to date. And, you know, because as the question in itself is referring, I guess, to, you know, agile responsiveness, speed of change. So we need to be thinking in a different way to maybe the way that we've done in the past.
Okay, sure. Thank you, sir. And there is one more question from Mohammed Diaz. He's asking, is there any specific courses on HR and people analytics so that it will add value to his career?
Okay. There is, oh gosh, that's a great question, isn't it? I mean, of course, I could always say you need to come on my workshops, but I'm not. I think one of the things I would say is that I referred to a piece of research from Analytics in HR. So I would suggest that Analytics in HR is a very good place to start, particularly if you want to improve your numerical capability, your data capability, because you can't train people on data in a group because everybody is starting at a different place. So Analytics in HR is a great place to go. If it is something and you look at it and you find of interest, then just send me a note and I'll send you a code because I can get you money off. So, you know, I'm very keen to make sure you pay for as little as you need to be honest. So I think that definitely you can get there. I think there's also Academy you can look at. That there are a whole range of online courses, but I think you need to just be careful that you don't get into too much of the statistical stuff because, you know, it takes 3 years to get a master's in scientific statistics. So unless you want to go down that route, you need to think about what you're specifically trying to, the outcome of what you're going to do is going to give you.
Thank you, sir. And there is a question from Kumbagiri Vasudha. She's asking, any suggestible software tool to a person shifted from pharma marketing representative to software?
Gosh, that's a big question. Okay, so I think let me answer it with two strands, and I hope it helps. That there obviously is people analytics specific software, okay, which is specialist. So that would be companies such as Visier, VISIER, Perceptics. They are specifically providing you with people analytics tools and techniques which are trying to do some of the predictive work for you without you having to necessarily have an expert. The second category are organizations where you would probably bring together different technology applications or HR systems and try and unify it by bringing together information and data which will enable you to then have a better perspective on dashboards and analytics. So that might be a company like Cruncher HR, which was referred to in the blog, MHR Analytics. There's a whole host. Those would be the ones that I would start. Activate Intelligence is another one. So there's a whole raft of different organizations in this space. I think it's about defining what you specifically want, where you are as an organization, what you need, and what you want to get. But there's some very interesting technologies out there, and it depends whether you want an established or whether you are prepared to take a risk and maybe be part of the development of a prototype tool that somebody has already created and get it at a much cheaper cost to help them on their learning journey, etc. I hope that's helpful in some way.
Thank you, sir. And a very interesting question from an academician, Professor Sudha is asking, which means even this is for everybody from academician. If we approach any industry, any company, we are doing some research and we need some data like recruitment data, performance data, whatever, they hesitate to give it. They don't usually give it. So where do the academicians and research scholars will get data to do research in HR analytics or people analytics?
To be honest, it's a common challenge, and I guess, and I would be surprised if Max wasn't also asked this same question this time last year. He would say exactly the same thing as I, is that when I'm asked to do a particular piece of work, it's fascinating to find that most organizations do not have the data that you need, or are not prepared, for, as you've outlined, to share it. And I think I inevitably therefore need to go into a project that says, I need this data. We now need to put a communication strategy in place that obtains the agreement of employees and the employer to share this particular data, and this is why. So this comes back to the heart of ethics and privacy challenges, because communication is the most important aspect of that challenge. So I think it's not a surprising issue, but inevitably, if you get into a project, then you've got an opportunity to approach people and to say, we're going to do this piece of work. The outcome is trying to benefit you and your employees by this reasoning, and therefore we would now like to obtain this information. Will you give your approval to do that? So I think there's a different relationship that needs to be established with both organizations and their employees to help us on this journey, because as you rightly say, we can't do anything without the data.
Okay, thank you, sir. And there is a question from Shaiju Matthew from YouTube live streaming. He's asking, could you share some light on how to use analytics for organization design and effectiveness?
Oh, right, great question. So organizational design, which I think is an area that HR has not really focused on very much, and yet I think is one of the very core strategic tools in our toolkit, because it's about designing. So when you're using organizational design, what you would tend to do is start to look at relationships between. So you would look at span of control. You would start to look at process issues, looking in terms of the relationships between different areas of process. And so all of these data points would then start to be looking at, so if we change this, what impact is that going to have? And so that's a very, very simplified way of trying to explain it. There is a great book which was written by, if I can't see it in my library and I can't remember it off the top of my head. There is a great book and it's specifically written for, I'm just going to try and see if I can get you the name. I do apologize. Let me just see if I can get you it. It's the best book, and it is called Data-Driven Organizational Design, and it's written by a guy called Rupert. Oh gosh, my brain is Rupert Morrison. So it's printed by Kogan Page, the same people that printed my book. So Data-Driven Organizational Design by Rupert Murdoch is the book, the go-to book on org design and analytics. But that's the simple thing. It's looking at the relationships between different teams, different functions, looking at the business data, productivity data, and starting to see how can we improve those elements by changing structure, redefining process, etc.
Thank you, sir. And one more question from Mr. Arun Narahari. He's asking, given the HR folks are not technically oriented and the huge data that is available, what is the best tools for them to perform predictive analytics?
My answer to the question is please do not try to do predictive analytics. If you're an HR practitioner, don't do it, because there are too many pitfalls and problems for, and I don't mean this in a nasty way, amateur statistical people to do. my particular view would be we need to either buy resourcing, borrow it, either from finance or from marketing. Marketing is very ahead of the game on this, or operations, or we build it over time. So my view would be don't, because it takes me a long time, and I've been doing this a while. There are people who can do it far quicker than me. But there are tools that will help you. Sort of Tableau, Power BI, SPSS, all sorts of those tools. But Excel is not going to do it for you to start with. Okay, it was never designed for that. So there are. My response to you would be, if you think there is a predictive opportunity, then you need to build a business case to justify that actually it's worth getting somebody in who will do it much quicker, much faster, much better than we would if we were just a normal HR practitioner. Sorry, that didn't want to be negative, but I'm just being honest.
Okay, thank you, sir. And there is a question from Anil Suresh. Please give tips to use people analytics for improving performance of faculty members.
Oh gosh, wow. Well, at a very simple level, you could look at measuring capability. So you could measure capability at point A and measure it at point B. What is the gap? What's the improvement? You could probably look at a series of faculty heads and start to say, why have these people improved and why have these people not? I would look at performance data. How is their performance assessed? Is it objective, or is it a typical appraisal conversation? You may want to link it to some factors that are possibly more aligned to their faculty's interest. Maybe the ability to sell more courses, get more participants in, to enable people who have been through the workshops to have reached a particular standard or quality. So those would be some of the things that you would look at. I think the critical part, it's always difficult when you're looking at senior leaders. You always tend to look at what is the senior leader accountable for, and therefore how can you measure that? So that's probably the best way to start, is to look at what is that faculty member accountable for, truly accountable for, how do we measure it, and how do we then go about getting those data points that will help us. But in the meantime, you could definitely do capability. You could definitely look at what's the difference between a high performing faculty member and an okay performing. And that's not saying anybody's not good, but it's just saying, is there a reason, or is there particular experiences that have led to them becoming a high-performing faculty member? That would probably need, a lot of people to be in that position. But that would give you what I call the outlier study, i.e., what is it that makes these people so damn good, and how can we replicate it in the future? So that would be another way where you could use that. But it all comes down to this core employee data. The core things that you can do, and starting to look at the particular people elements that impact on that faculty member. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And question from Arun Chandran, with the mental health becoming a key performance parameter, how can people analytics be used to evaluate and assess an employee?
Great question. It's the well-being area is a huge growth aspect of people analytics. There are organizations which are specifically focusing on that. So there's one called People Matter. I know you've got People Matters as your Indian magazine, but there's a company called peoplematter.tech, which is specifically focused on well-being, measurement of well-being, and the diagnosis of particular effectiveness of solutions. And I think in many ways, that's almost the key thing to think about. It's about the diagnosis of what the problem is, if it is a problem, and if there has been an intervention, whether it's coaching, mentoring, whether it has been a particular piece of support, financial or whatever, then there would also then be a reassessment to see what's the impact of that particular technique and method. So And then if you've got enough of that data, that would then enable you to start to use analytics to identify that we predict that if we do this with these types of well-being challenges, this might be the quickest or most effective way of helping that particular individual. But you'd need to build up a lot of data to be able to get to that point. So if that's a real critical area, you may want to, connect with some of these well-being people analytics companies that are out there and are doing some really interesting work in the field.
Thank you, sir. And I think this would be the last question from Mr. Girinath. Instead of using humans to do digital marketing, shall we include automation tools to do digital marketing to target sales in a niche market? Does that works on a long term and scopes on consistent profits?
Ooh, blimey, that's a great question. I think that the underlying, obviously there's a digital marketing theme that's being talked about there. If I just stand back a little bit from it, I guess what I would say is that the replacement of people by automation, robots, whatever we want to use, it will happen. I don't think it will be quite as quickly. It won't be adopted as quickly as everybody may think, because there is a huge cost and impact that's involved. I think personally that, again, this is where I see there's an opportunity for HR. I think the role of job design is going to become a very important part, because I think what we need to do is to look at elements of jobs. And as you just articulated in your question, there are elements that could be done in an automated way, but you could be that there may be elements that could be done better by humans. But let's focus on those parts which, are routine, process-based, boring, continuous, whatever. I think job design is a critical tool for the future HR toolkit to help that sort of question, because they will then start to analyze how the job is constructed, how you can deconstruct it, how you can then enable automation to take certain things and then leave, well, what have we got left? And therefore, how do we then reconfigure that role, which then leads into org design? So I think if the question is alluding to the fact is this going to happen? I think in the next 3 to 4 years, yes, it will. I think it's something that can be done and can be of great benefit. But I think HR's got a great part to play. We just need to have the courage, and there's my word again, courage, to say that we need to be a part of that process, because job analysis and job design, I think, are vital tools in this whole conundrum of automation and job replacement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, there are a lot of appreciations, and they're telling this is an excellent session, a very good session. It's very knowledgeable. They have learned a lot of concepts, examples. There are many things. Even in YouTube live stream also, there are many people there appreciating. So thanks for your presence and valuable contribution to the knowledge domain of people analytics. Also, this is enriching because usually in developing countries, this is the problem. So whenever we approach authorities in Western oriented concepts, so obviously they used to charge more, and we are not affordable to get them. But this is actually really good thing. It's like a kind of spiritual practice happening in academia, especially after this pandemic. So there are many volunteers, especially people like Max Bloomberg, you, and Matt Salveson, Hugh Wilmot. So there are a lot of experts, intelligence in this domain of academics and other domain. So they're voluntarily coming forward and they're delivering lectures for the underdeveloped and developing countries for free of cost. So this is a service, a holy service, and hats off to you all. We wholeheartedly thank you, sir, for your presence and valuable contribution. And also I thank all the faculty members, students, especially the participants of this webinar, and people who are watching through YouTube live streaming also. And I wholeheartedly thank our management and director for this opportunity. Thank you all. Thank you so much. We'll meet you in the next webinar soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
It's really thank you, Justin. It's a good event. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Stop recording.